probably going live, but we're not quite sure. So I'll just talk for a couple of minutes so we don't miss anything critical. Looks like we should be live. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking today about importing and exporting to the EU. Really difficult topic for a lot of people, particularly UK-based sellers, but we're also going to talk today more broadly for anyone outside of Europe, including the US or Australia or anyone else, Canada-based sellers. And we're talking with Jacob McQuoid of Avask. So, Jacob, thanks for coming on live with us. Good to see you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for having me, Michael.
Pleasure. And Avask, I have to say, has been spoken of in glowing terms, which is not common with importers and exporters these days amongst the 10K Collective Mastermind members. So very happy to have you on because the members seem pretty happy with what you guys are doing, which is good endorsement. So if you are watching live or on the replay, feel free to pop in any comments or questions, even better, that you have for Jacob. And if we don't catch them live, then we can try and catch them on the on the flip side, in the various different social platforms we're on. But other than that, we are going to record the podcast, so that will be coming out. That's our main sort of focus here at Amazing FBA Towers. So, Jacob, are you ready to go ahead and record the podcast?
Already.
Excellent. Right then. So when the camera cuts back to me, I'll grab a sip of water, silent splutter, everyone. Okay. Right, let's record this sucker. Ladles and jelly spoons, welcome back to the 10K Collective podcast, the place to be for 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon private label sellers. We are talking today on a really important topic, which is how, if you want to sell into Europe, which is a juicy place, do you do it? I mean, when I say juicy, what I mean is Germany is the second biggest Amazon marketplace in the planet, and there are lots of other places, France particularly, there that will gladly buy our products. But it's a little bit tricky to get our products in there sometimes, and today we're going to talk about how any non-Europeans can export their goods there. We're talking to Jacob McQuoid of Avask, and Avask are real experts in import-export and the whole business of compliance, customs, you name it, anything to do with that whole process for Amazon sellers. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Michael. Excited to be here.
Yeah, good to have you here. It's been a while coming. So tell us about import-export. I mean, the first question is, why does it even matter? Do you think that it's actually worth even bothering these days, or is it just too much pain to even make the effort to bother selling into Europe if you're outside of Europe?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth the pain. I think a lot of people were fairly complacent with the ease of selling in Europe prior to Brexit because importing to the UK is fairly easy, fairly standard, especially for people like overseas where the UK is, or the English is their main language, so it makes it easier. Because of Brexit, it did make things quite difficult. You have to import directly to Germany, then you're dealing with like the German language. But essentially the sales are still there, so it's a slight barrier to entry, but I wouldn't want it to put anyone off. You've just got to learn a new way of working, really. And essentially it's kind of, you have to go through slightly more compliance is what I would say. But at the end of the day, if it's going to be revenue that it's going to build for your business, why would you stop just because of that slight hiccup?
Yeah, I guess the question is whether it is a slight hiccup. So hopefully today will reassure people. The other thing I would say, though, you mentioned barrier to entry. All I would say is it's a barrier to entry that you've got to jump over once and get the setup, and that may be a bit painful and cost a bit of money. But that's also a barrier to every single one of your competitors who can't be bothered to do it. So I think that's if anything, actually a kind of a good reason to look into it seriously, in my opinion. So tell me about the common misconceptions that people have about this. What are the things that you see sellers falling afoul of because they just assume something and it isn't quite that way?
So I would say, first of all, and it's not so much anymore, it still happens, but I mean, if we go back to start of last year, sellers, they assumed that essentially they can trust kind of whoever they're going to ship products with, whether it's one of the massive couriers, whether it's a huge freight forwarder, whether it's your local freight forwarder. But essentially what I would advise is to always use someone who is knowledgeable on Amazon and knowledgeable with e-commerce, because like whenever you're talking about import export, whenever you're talking about sending products somewhere, and if you look online about import export, it's always about two separate entities, a buyer and a seller. And now for a lot of Amazon sellers and a lot of e-commerce sellers, it's moving stock, and there's not many other industries where you're moving thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands worth of like stock to countries where you have no physical establishment. There's not many industries that have so many companies who are doing that. So that was one. Also, thinking you've got enough information without kind of really double checking. So one of the main things I'd say is when the UK left the European Union, everyone had to get what's called an EORI number. So you have one for the EU, which the UK was included within the EU. And then because of the separation, you had to get one for the EU and one for the UK. So just take an example, US seller had one for the UK, brought products into the UK, and then they were distributed from there because we were in the free flow of moving goods before Brexit. Now, lots of freight forwarders, other businesses would say, all right, you need a new one, and then you can import into the EU. And then suddenly I had a lot of clients, a massive amount of clients who suddenly shipped after Brexit. Products got to the European Union, say Germany, and they still didn't get through, even with that EURI number. But it's because their business isn't based in the EU. It's not actually physically located there, which if you had to talk to someone who knew the industry, knew how e-commerce works, then you would have got that information earlier. And you imagine you send a container directly to Germany, you think it's going to get cleared, it waits there for a week, 2 weeks before you get this information sorted. You imagine the charges that you're going to have on that, they will be very substantial.
Yeah, that's definitely a nightmare to avoid, isn't it? So yeah, and it does amaze me that people do kind of plunge into this stuff after a bit of a quick Google. I mean, it's one thing to send, a few cartons or even a pallet or two, but it's something else to send a container or even a substantial number of pallets without checking it properly. And I do come across that occasionally, as you say, probably less often now because the horror stories have circulated in all the Facebook groups, I think. But if you're about to do that, please don't get into touch with experts and get it sorted. So tell me a little bit about Americans then, if they are exporting goods. Presumably quite a few people would want to go, if they've got their goods made in China, which is still common at this stage of the game in mid 2022, and they are also exporting it from China to the US and then maybe China to UK. And if they want to sell in Germany, would it make sense for them to go directly from China to Germany? Or do you think that's not wise? And if so, how do they go about that?
I mean, it depends really. Like if you've got the inventory and if you've got the sales and you are able to go direct to source, I would always go direct to source because you can minimize costs. Obviously, if you bring it to one country and then send it again to the end destination, then there's additional costs for transport, but also you might incur like additional duty because you're going to have to pay that when it's, so for say, for example, you bring it into the UK, you then wanted to distribute it from the UK to Germany, you're going to pay duty when it comes into UK, duty when it goes into Germany based on your product. So if you are able to, which I know for not everyone is possible, but if you are able to, definitely go direct to source. It's going to minimize your costs. In terms of how to do it, so if you're a US-based company, you've got your supplier in China, you're bringing goods directly into Germany. One, obviously, you're going to need a freight forwarder. So everyone's going to know how to get a freight forwarder if they've already been imported from China to US, etc. But also you will need to appoint an indirect representative. So essentially what this is someone to be jointly liable and jointly responsible for the information within your customs declaration. So that's the information on your products, like the product descriptions, it's the information on the product codes, values, that side of things. Essentially, the European Union wants someone within inside their jurisdiction to be jointly responsible. In case, for whatever reason, information was correct, they chase you for payment because you've paid incorrect duties. The business is based in the US. They don't really have any kind of power there to actually make sure they do 100% pay the money. So they want to appoint someone within inside their jurisdiction in case they don't, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And well, I mean, it makes sense. It's a bit of a nightmare, but you can wrap your head around it. So, so an indirect representative is somebody who, I mean, who actually does these things? Is it somebody who's completely independent? Do they tend to work for companies that are willing to take on the risk, or what's the sort of structure of that?
So you've kind of got, and obviously don't take the assumption that all EU countries work the same. In a general sense, you would think they would because it's the single market, but they don't. Like you might send a product to Germany, they might ask for this requirements, like an indirect representation. You might send it to France, it might get through, then you might send it again, and then it doesn't get through for whatever reason. So it doesn't always work the same. But essentially, there's two ways of having an indirect representative. So one is actually through the declaration. So the person who submits the customs declaration, that could be the freight forwarder, that could be the customs agent, or it could be someone else, like a separate customs broker. But they can submit the declaration and they can act as the representative. That's one way. The alternative way is for them to appoint a third-party representative within the declaration. So in some countries, you can do that. So essentially, you'll have a broker, the importer, and a third-party representative. In some cases, the brokerage can just do the whole piece for you, but in some cases, they won't. So that, I think, as well would lead to some of the slight confusion, because some countries won't allow it both ways. Some countries will only allow it one way. So you might send a shipment to one country, you can do it in a certain way, and you have an indirect representative who isn't completing the declaration. You try and do a replicate in another country in the EU, and it doesn't work the same way.
Yeah, bit of a nightmare, this variation. And unless Americans listening roll their eyes and go, "Oh my God, the Europeans are so complicated." Well, guess what? When it comes to sales tax, the US is just as complicated for Europeans. Trust me. So it's nowhere is entirely straightforward, I have to say. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, worth knowing about. Now, so that brings me to the next question, really, which is if you are wanting to sell into various different European countries, how would you go about this? As a sort of strategic thing, would you start with just one country? Would you start pan EU, but then try and just insert your goods through one particular country? How would you sort of approach it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the size of the business elsewhere. If you've done your market research, you know, and you're pretty confident that you're going to get a good amount of sales, you're going to get good revenue, then it can, in a lot of cases, be worth getting all of, say, the pan-European countries. So if we're talking about Amazon, the countries where they currently use warehousing for pan-Europeans: Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Poland, and the Czech Republic. The best way Amazon can operate is really by having all of those countries enabled. So you would get registered for VAT in all of those countries, and you would allow them to store the products in all of those countries, and they're going to use their algorithm to distribute goods accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean you have to get products into each of those individual countries. You just have to get products to one and then let Amazon distribute from there, which, yeah, is kind of the best way of doing things, and that's the ideal scenario. But in a lot of cases, you might not know how it's going to go in Europe. So you might not be too confident about your sales. You might be just wanting to test the water. And I would say in those cases, you probably just want to register for, say, one. You want to register for one, maybe two, probably Germany and France, realistically. Allow Amazon to store your products in Germany and France. There's within the back end of Amazon, you have inventory settings, so you can just allow them to store in certain countries. So you could go, say, Germany and France, and then you can see how sales go from there. You still only have to get the goods to one country, so that's always going to be the case. You only have to get them to one, and then Amazon will use their algorithm to distribute accordingly from there. So that's a potential option. If you're really, really unsure about how to sell in the EU and whether your products are really going to do well at all, and that you're not sure about expanding, then you can look at like a European fulfillment network, which is where Amazon, so say, for example, you're already selling in the UK because you might be based in the US, you know the UK market because it's obviously the same language, and you can kind of guess it a bit better than the European, like the Europeans, the Germans, French, etc. So you might want to just allow Amazon to fulfill from the UK into the EU. It comes with cross-border charges, which are quite high, but it gives you a good idea of how your product's going to be adopted. Or kind of the other way is fulfilling it yourself directly from the US, which is really not the most attractive option, and you're probably going to get not much traction unless you have a very, very niche product.
Yeah, I mean, didn't occur to me that you would actually consider doing that. I suppose it's possible, isn't it? If you've got something that's just not available at all,
Yeah.
maybe. But I can't see the expectation that things come within 2 days going very well, with it taking 2 weeks and having to fill out a customs declaration form when it arrives at your doorstep as a consumer. But so tell me a little bit about this. I mean, first of all, let's talk about the pan EU thing you just mentioned. I mean, I've got a couple of clients in the mastermind, one in particular who's using pan EU, got
Yeah.
it going again, and sent stock in there from the UK. But his thesis, I think, based on experience and the numbers that he shared with us in the mastermind, to be very interesting, is that nevertheless, if you send stock into, say, Germany and sales pick up in France, you should get Amazon redistributing that stock. But his experience tells us that maybe that's not really going to happen, because it costs them a lot of money and energy and fuel costs to transport goods around between one country and another, right? So it's not a casual thing.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is something to be said for sending stock directly to a country where you want to make sure you're in stock with your best sellers?
Yeah, I would say if you can, I mean the problem is setting up like the solution for both. It can be you might get used to just sending it to one country, so you know what you're doing. You know, right? I have a process there, and now suddenly I've got to then test another customs border, which is because that's what I was referencing earlier. Don't expect German customs and French customs to work the same. One of your products might get through, and then one of the products might not get through in the other. So that's one thing I would say. I mean, Amazon should transport some of the goods based on their algorithm, but as you said, it does obviously cost, but at the same time, it costs them to keep in warehouses. So they do weigh that up on their algorithm. But from that perspective, if you look into the pan-European settings, then technically, from what I know, you should still get the local fulfillment fee, even if it was sent from Germany. And I believe they should still be able to fulfill it prime. So I think from that perspective, it won't make a huge difference. I know there's certain products where it does. There's certain products where you have to send direct. You can't actually use Amazon's distribution. But that's much more kind of like individual cases, really. The majority you can use Amazon then to transfer. But no, you are right. I have spoken to some sellers where they do send to one country and then they didn't distribute as much as they thought. Like the majority just did stay in that country. If you're more happy with having your inventory spread and you kind of know where you've sent it, then that makes sense. But I don't think overall it would affect your sales realistically. So is it worth going direct, creating that additional work for yourself rather than just going to the one place?
Yeah, it's a good question. So couple of questions. So EFN, the European Fulfillment Network. If a lot of people I know are UK based, and it probably would apply to some Amazon sellers based in the US as well, will have
Yeah.
stock in the UK, and they don't want to go all in on shipping. Well, they don't want to go all in on having to VAT register anywhere in Europe,
Yeah.
and other things like the EPR, whatever other compliance you've got to jump through in Germany. There's a new acronym every month at the moment. So tell me about EFN. So
Yeah.
you get a cross-border charge as the seller. So I know you have to pay a bit more. Um, does it still get from the customer's perspective? Do you think it still has the Prime badge and the right sort of does it cost them extra? How does that all play out?
So it shouldn't really cost them any extra from what I know. The Amazon will calculate taxes and duties. So there's a difference between so when you were using EFN and after Brexit and after the 1st of July last year, there was quite a lot of changes within like the VAT landscape. Obviously, first of all, there's the official customs border getting introduced, but then also there was the changes of 1st of July to kind of how VAT is collected in a lot of cases. So there's a threshold for duty. So if you're sending direct to a consumer from the UK, so you fulfill it from the UK, Amazon fulfill it, and it goes to a consumer in Germany. There's VAT on any value. If it's €1, €2, €3, there's VAT, but there isn't duty until 150. So the way it's collected is slightly different. So the Amazon will automatically collect the VAT. Obviously, if it's below 150, it's just a VAT, and then if it goes above 150, then they also will calculate now because of the EFN. This is only recently they will calculate taxes as well. So that's quite nice that they do that part for you, and it's nice that they relaunched that because that has literally only started in the last few months. Before then, it wasn't a possibility. The only way you could do it is through MFN, which, if I'm honest, for most people was a bit of a nightmare because dealing with couriers, dealing with who's paying the duties and taxes. Amazon had a policy where you couldn't make the customer liable for duties and taxes. So that was a bit of a headache for a lot of people. And in a lot of cases, it should have worked and it didn't necessarily work. In terms of Prime eligibility, I believe they still do offer some Prime in some cases. I don't know what the criteria is product wise and whether it's 100% of products that would be on Prime if they were actually locally there, or if they've got kind of a category to that. But it's a good option to kind of relaunch in Europe or start in Europe if you haven't actually sold there before, because at least you can, although you might not get as much profit because of the fees you're getting charged, and you might even get no profit at all, at least you can know, right, there is actually business there for me. There's revenue I can generate. So I am going to put the investment into like paying for bulk shipments to go direct there, potentially having a third party warehouse or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So that just to conclude, then, don't do MFNs to merchant fulfilled. In other words, send your own stuff, because in theory, you could make the couriers liable, but they won't want to pay for dues and taxes. Yes, I've heard the odd person who's tried to do that and it just got sent back, or it just didn't work really. So
Yeah.
the other one is, it's fairly clear from what you've said. EFN is somewhat imperfect. It's a very, very good system for testing, but it's not a very good one for scaling, right? So that's what
Mm.
you're saying. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. So once we get to that point, then. Tell us a little bit about what the procedures are. So let's assume that we've got somebody, American or British, I guess in this case it doesn't make so much difference, who has got, who's tried EFN, European Fulfillment Network. They've just literally put a listing up in Germany and their stock is in the UK. When it sells, Amazon will deal with getting it across the border and charge us a little bit extra for the privilege. Nevertheless, a good option. So what's the next stage then if people want to actually start selling in a specific country? Let's say they go for Germany, which is the obvious one. What do people need to do in terms of compliance?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, if you're going to look to store products in any country in the EU, then you're going to need a VAT number. So that's kind of the first point of call, really. So you need to get a VAT registration, which, if I'm honest, Germany is out of all of the European markets, is the best market by quite a way for the majority of products. But it's also the longest in terms of getting VAT registered, which is frustrating. So if you are planning to launch, then make sure you've considered the timeframes for VAT registration, because realistically, it's going to take 3 to 4 months, in some cases longer. So it's a very, very long time. So that's one thing you're going to need to do. You're going to need to check if there's any kind of additional product compliance that you need to adhere to in the European Union. So one example might be like what's called a responsible person. So essentially, and it will be required for a lot of products, you need to appoint a responsible person within the EU who essentially, a responsible person might hold the paperwork for your product. So this might be the paperwork essentially proving you're saying what you're selling, and maybe lab reports, that kind of thing, if you sell something a bit more kind of on that side. And essentially trading standards can visit, make sure, right, what you're saying you're selling is what you're selling, and you've got all the correct paperwork for it. That might be one of the requirements. In Germany and France, you now need to register for what's called extended producer responsibility, which it frightens a lot of people, I'll be honest, Michael. And it's a new regulation. As you said, it's a new acronym. But essentially, it's an environmental policy where people have to pay for the life cycle of their product. So you start having to pay essentially what's like an eco tax. An eco tax for, say, like the packaging you put onto products, like that's plastic, cardboard. It might be for like waste electronics and electrical items, batteries, and other categories. So Germany and France, and that is going to be more countries in future. That will definitely scare people when I say that. But one thing I would say is it's small contributions. It's not bank breaking figures. It is small contributions. So don't be expected to be paying a significant amount. Obviously, if you're selling a ridiculous amount, your fee might be higher, but then everything's relevant. So that's that section. And then also making sure you've got someone to clear customs for you. So whether you need to appoint a third party representative or whether who's doing the clearance will do it for you anyway, but ensuring that you do have that. And not necessarily, unless they're an e-commerce specialist, trusting a freight forwarder, because I've had a lot of cases where people have said, yeah, it's fine, no worries, we can clear that for you. It gets to the border and then they need more information because, one, you're not an EU-based business, so they don't have that indirect representative. And then you need to then appoint one, which might not be immediate. And demurrage charges at ports for containers, pallets can be significantly high. So you don't want to get caught up.
And what is a demurrage charge? I've heard of it, but I'm never quite clear.
Yeah, it's essentially like essentially when you're getting charged for your goods that are stuck at customs, basically. So the goods are stuck at customs, they've got to sit somewhere. They might sit like in a bonded warehouse. So for anyone who doesn't know what a bonded warehouse is, it's essentially a warehouse. It might be located near the port that can be used to hold goods that haven't cleared customs. So there hasn't been an import declaration. Those goods will be held there and they can't be adapted. They can't move until they've actually been declared to customs and customs have released the goods. Now, to keep in those warehouses, there's going to be charges. So the freight forwarder, it might be their warehouse or it might be an agent they use. That warehouse is going to charge per day per pallet or per cubic meter, whatever it is, and it will cost a lot of money because they're not cheap to run and they're expensive to keep goods in there. So you could have pallets in there. If you had pallets in there for a week, if you had like 10 pallets in there a week, you'd be looking at thousands.
Wow. Okay. So 10 pallets for a week is thousands. That's actually kind of scary.
Yeah. In some cases, if you've got good rates with freight forwarders, you might have deals. But I know we had a client recently who had not a lot of pallets. It wasn't a lot, and it was in there for I think around 10 days, and it was a high fee. So yeah,
Yeah.
just making sure that if you're going to launch, you're talking to someone who knows what they're doing, someone who's been in the industry, and someone who's actually dealt with these situations before, so you don't end up in those situations.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. So talking of experts, let's just give you a second to remind us what you guys do at Avask. So I also gave a general hint of that at the beginning of the show, but tell us
Yeah.
more precisely what you do for people.
Yeah, so at Vask, we help sellers expand to new markets. We help people kind of across the globe expand to different markets. One of the main ones being Europe, but also like the US, the UAE, Australia, and that's across like multiple different services. So it might be like accounting, incorporations if you want to set up a separate entity. It might be international tax. What I mean by that is like a US company expanding to Europe, needed to register for VAT in Europe. It doesn't have to be US, so you can be based anywhere in the world. We can register you for VAT across these different countries. Customs, obviously, which is my focus, which is at the moment for the UK and some EU-based countries. We can help you with getting products in. Also, new legislation. So again, EPR, what I mentioned before about the environmental policy, that's essentially something that's fairly new in terms of how it affects e-commerce sellers. So that's something we offer. We keep on top of all these compliance, all these regulations. We would rather bring it in-house rather than sellers having to go to 10 different places. Hence why we try and bring everything kind of within the realm, within the compliance realm, in-house and have it managed under one roof. So you don't have the headache of 10 different providers for 10 different services, which are all in the compliance aspect.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that strikes me more and more is that what I think of as just exporting is not really so much about just the act of exporting. It's having goods in a country, which isn't quite the same thing. In other words, they've got to clear customs and get there, but once they're there, they're then subject to regulations which they may not be subject to in the US or UK, or even
Yeah.
maybe in some other EU member countries, right? So yes, I mean, what I think of as one big lump for you is 10 different things, and as you say, 10 different things but handled by one person becomes one big lump I could just hand off and say take care of it, as opposed to having 10 different service providers, which could be a nightmare. And I've been there with exports to the US where I had 3 or 4 service providers not talking to each other, and that took a long time. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely worth avoiding at 100%. So I know you've got a couple of ways that you can help people. So one is you've got a whole bunch of information about importing and exporting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so yeah, we've got loads of information on our website, which is vaskgroup.com for importing and exporting. So you can go through our website, you can contact us for any of the other services as well, because people might listen in, might have already sorted import and export, and they might need something else, EPR, accounting, whatever it might be. But you can contact us through there. You can call us. We got a team here in Southampton. We've got a team in the US. We've got teams in Europe. So we do have a global presence. So it can speak in the different time zones and the different languages, etc. And as well, like for myself, if you want to talk to me directly, want to talk direct about imports and exports, there is a calendar link directly to booking a call with myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, so the links for those things, amazingfba.com/Jacob, Jacob, for Jacob, if you want to go straight to his calendar. It's just because his calendar link was a bit hard to read out. And the other one is the information you've got all about imports, exports, and customs. If you haven't read a sort of primer, a bit of basic information about this, definitely worth reading. And that's at amazingfba.com/export. So just do go and check that out. Even if you've been exporting successfully to the EU, I would suggest that you keep yourself up to date because, as you say, there's a lot of changes that seem to come almost monthly at the moment. It's kind of crazy. Certainly quarterly, there's something new. So we're going to talk specifically for UK-based Amazon sellers trying to get into Germany next, just because I deal with quite a few of those in the mastermind. But for the moment, it just remains for me to say many, many thanks, Jacob, for getting us through those choppy waters in one piece and helping to elucidate some of the mysteries of exports into Europe.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm hoping there was some good information there and it kind of answers some questions for people.
Great stuff. So that's our first recording done, folks. If you're watching the live or on the replay, do not forget to pop in any questions or comments you've got, and we can weave them into the show. Nothing so far. Make sure that it's relevant to importing, exporting, those not random stuff, please. Okay, let's go on to the next episode. Is the word I'm looking for. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 10K Collective podcast, the place to be for 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon sellers, particularly today, those who wish to sell from the UK into Europe and especially Germany. That's our focus today because that's the focus of many of our mastermind members and my friends who are selling or trying to sell into Europe once again. And we welcome back Jacob McQuoid from Avask, who are really tried and tested experts in the whole business of how to get goods into Europe. Jacob, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much again, Michael, for having me.
Pleasure. So let's talk about Germany and how to go from UK to Germany. It's obviously one of those things where sometimes the indirect approach might be better. So do you, first of all, suggest that if we want to eventually sell in Germany, that we actually import into Germany, or do you prefer to go via Holland or France, or do you have other various hacks that people seem to have? What's your sort of approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously all dependent on an individual case. The difficulty with Germany and German customs is they can be quite particular in a lot of cases. So, I mean, essentially anyone who's imported before, imported like from China to the UK, they've imported to other countries. Like generally speaking, people are importing under like cost insurance freight, which is generally what most people would have imported into, say, the UK prior to Brexit. German customs, they do for Amazon sellers and for stock transfer. So if we're talking about UK to the EU, and in a lot of cases, that is just going to be a stock transfer because you've brought a whole load of stock to your warehouse from China. As an example, you then say, all right, I want to send 20% of that, but it's not worth me going direct from China because it's not quite a big enough amount. So I have to bring it to the UK and then I send it. But they will enforce what's called the deductive method when there isn't an official transaction in place, when you're just moving stock from UK to EU. So you're the exporter and you're the importer. So the deductive method is your retail price. So they'll likely want to see what you're selling the product for on Amazon. Deducting VAT, which in Germany the standard rate is 19%, and then deducting Amazon commission, which is around, it's probably retail minus 30 or 40%. So in some cases, it's not a massive issue, to be honest, Michael, because you might have a product that could be manufactured in the UK or it could have 0% duty. So your actual cost is not, it's not affected too much. One thing that will be affected is cash flow, because you have to, when you're importing to Germany, you're going to be paying import VAT. Is again at 19%. Now, if you're paying import VAT on 5,000 or 10,000, obviously it's going to be a different amount. So you're tying up more cash for more time. Now, a lot of the imports that we do is direct through the Netherlands. So in a lot of cases, you've got routes, you've got like Felixstowe to Rotterdam, and then from Rotterdam it can go on to Amazon, which or not just Amazon, it could go to another location in Germany if you've got a warehouse, wherever it might be, and that's not too far. Like in a lot of cases, like going into Hamburg, it might not actually be too much of a difference in distance. And in the Netherlands, you've got a couple of options for clearance. So essentially, there's some good options. One's called what's limited fiscal representation, which is something that we offer at the moment. And essentially, when goods go through the Netherlands, and as long as they're going directly out, so in the case that I mentioned, you say Felixstowe to Rotterdam, from Rotterdam then to a warehouse somewhere in Germany, then you're able to use this solution. And essentially, instead of needing your own VAT number in the Netherlands, which in general, and a lot of people know this, in general, when you're importing, you're going to need a VAT number and you're going to need to pay import VAT. Now, through this solution, you essentially take advantage of the agent's VAT number, which in this case is ours. You take advantage of our VAT number and we defer that VAT. And then it's essentially not paid. So you just have to pay duty. So that's a good cash flow implementation. And also they'll accept kind of cost price for the imports. We've had clients with different investigations for stock transfers through the Netherlands. Customs may want to inspect every now and again, and we've had questions, we've had investigations on different valuations, and as long as they've been able to prove, so this is how much I paid my supplier, this is the information. That might be detailed information because they might want to see transfers of money, because supplier invoices, they can be made up, obviously, but in most cases they won't be, but they might actually want to see the money transferring. So do be prepared for that if you're going to go down that route. But it is better because obviously then you're doing it based on the cost price. You're not having to pay VAT, so that's a good cash flow option. And just generally, Rotterdam port for road freight is quite good. It's quite quick. So yeah.
Wow. So there's lots to take aboard there, but I think that this is the as we've agreed, and you're sticking to it. This episode is really for those who are a bit more advanced and used to the detail. And if you're not used to the detail, go listen to the first episode and calm down. You don't need to know all of this stuff, because you can phone Avask and get Jacob to sort it out for you, or the entire team, of course. But I like your thinking about this, because I think so just to be clear, my understanding, just reflecting back in simple words, is that you're going to get charged duty on the cost of shipping something, the cost of manufacturing, plus a bit of insurance, which is normally not very much, right? Whereas what you were saying in Germany is that you're basically getting charged duty on the selling price minus VAT and other things. So in other words, you might have twice the duty, three times the duty that you would have coming into the UK. Yeah. However, I mean, it does depend on the duty rate, as you say. The percentage might be 0, or it might be 2 or 3%. So yeah, it's not to put it out of proportion, but nevertheless worth avoiding. And above all, the simplicity of limited fiscal representation.
Just to add before we
please.
move on, obviously I'm talking in general here. For some people, the option that I mentioned won't be possible, because it's not a case of, right, I want to send like with DHL, and I'm going to tell DHL to go through the Netherlands and then go on to Germany, because they're a courier. They're going to go into their system, and it's going to go via their system, their network. So I'm talking more like pallets, like LTL, FTL, which is less than trailer load, full trailer load. But for people who are just starting out, then yeah, you might want to look at just direct to Germany. Consider the costs, like see what the duty rate might be. If you've got kind of a high duty rate, then you might want to think about another option, because it's actually going to cost you a lot more. Potentially look into France, because again, France don't enforce that. So yeah, you've kind of got the options there. But yeah, if you're looking to send pallets, you're looking to send trailers, Netherlands to me is a really good option.
Great. So you mentioned France. Now, I've heard mixed things from the mastermind members, so all of whom doing, significant numbers overall. Some of them do bigger numbers in Europe, or attempting to get back to it. I mean, lots of people had like £1 million a year or more euros a year in Europe pre-Brexit. Post-Brexit, nobody's quite got back to those levels yet. But assuming that you are interested in France directly, I've heard that they're kind of similar to Germany sometimes, and a bit more like the Netherlands at other times. So what's the latest state of play, and how difficult they make it, and the hoops you've got to jump through if you want to go to France?
Yeah, so France is a little bit of a difficult one, because the information isn't always consistent. And I don't necessarily mean the actual information, or just the way people are doing things. So like you can go with, like one courier. So one courier company, they might do everything themselves, but it might get stuck at customs because you don't have a local entity. Another courier company, it might just go through customs. And even the same with like freight forwarders. Some freight forwarders would clear for non-EU entities, some won't. And essentially, so this is coming back to the old episode and the last episode, some information. There's two ways you can be an indirect representative. So one is by appointing like a third party within the declaration. So there's someone submitting the declaration who isn't the indirect representative, but they appoint a third party. Or the other option is it's just the person who's doing the declaration. In France, you only have that option. It's just the person doing the declaration who is the indirect representative. And essentially, it's their responsibility to make sure they are doing it in the correct way. And some people don't. Some people will just still clear it. They'll still clear it as a direct representative. It's not like customs are going through every single import looking, is this box right? Is this box right? Is this box right? It's up to the agent. So I know you mentioned mixed reviews, and that's completely right. It's because not everyone is doing the same thing. So you might have one company who is sending with X courier and everything's going smoothly. And you might have another company sending the same products who nothing's going smoothly at all. Everything's getting stopped and it's just a bit of a nightmare. So It's not an answer I like to give because it's not like a straight information. But it might be worth testing different avenues, different people, different couriers.
Okay. And is there, if you do want to sell in France, which is a slightly different thing, but obviously after Germany, by far the biggest market in Europe, um, is there a sort of workaround using the Netherlands again, or is that not really going to help you in that case?
Um, yeah, it is. It is. There is a workaround. I mean, you can do the same thing through the Netherlands. Like in any case, you can if you're sending pallets, you're sending like a truckload. You can go through the Netherlands and then to France. The one thing that I would say in this case is you're going to have higher transport costs because going up to the Netherlands and then down to France is going to be more expensive, like because it's more distance. It's more distance. You're going to get charged based on the distance of them taking the product. So whichever freight forwarder you're using, likely going to charge you more for that route. So again, these are all things to consider. It's like whether you want to deal with the headaches of going direct, or whether you want to find someone else who doesn't give you any other headaches, or if you want to look at the Netherlands options, but it's slightly more expensive. There's all these like different avenues that you can explore. But one thing to say is there is success out there. There's lots of people having success. So there is ways of doing it.
Yeah, interesting. And is that the sort of stuff that you can advise on if somebody's wanting to ship a certain amount of stuff to France, you'd be able to lay out those options, or would you always do things in a certain sort of correct way?
Yeah, so we can help in terms of imports with Germany, France, and the Netherlands. So those are the three main EU countries where, if you were to talk to me, those are the countries where I can help you with importing, which really are probably the countries you want to import to, because the largest market, and then Netherlands got really, really good port, and it's kind of an entry to Europe. So those are the countries where we can help you with, and a conversation with me, we can discuss how we can help, and where we can help and where we can fit in. And even if we can't fit in, where I would point you in the right direction to go to.
Great. Now, were there any other things we've talked about? EPR, the extended producer responsibility, which is now kicking in. Um, do we have to register for that if you're based in the UK or indeed anyone else? And if so, what's the sort of process for that?
Yeah, so EPR, extended producer responsibility, as I mentioned in the last recording we did, it's an environmental policy. Essentially, it's now coming into play, and it's been in play for a while, but the way it's affecting people is changing. Like online marketplaces have more responsibility now to ensure that people are compliant with EPR. So you will need to register. So Germany and France are the two places where you need to register for EPR, and those are the two places where at the moment you have to pay the contributions for the waste that you put onto the market. Now, there's three categories in Germany, which is packaging, which is like the packaging you put on the product, so plastic, cardboard, etc. There's also batteries, waste electronic and electrical items. In France, you've got the same three categories, plus another 13 more, which I'm not going to go into detail in, but they're more kind of like individual things like furniture, textiles, that kind of thing. If you sell those products, then you do need to register. In some categories, there is like thresholds. So again, this is something that we can assist with. Have a conversation with us. We'll be able to say, right, you sell these products. These are the categories you need to register in for Germany. These are the categories you need to register in for France.
Wow, so it does like quite a fiddly compliance thing, particularly in France, and that's not untypical. Like overall, French tend to be a bit complex and quite protectionist, but not consistent. So that's
Mhm.
kind of consistent French behaviour, and the Germans are consistent and sort of follow the letter of the EU law. So I guess some things don't change by the looks of it. Other than that, so we've got to be VAT registered, obviously. We
Yeah.
need an indirect representative. We need EPR. Are there any other things that we need to have in place in order to get selling in Germany or France if we want to?
Yeah, so you might need a responsible person. So a responsible person is essentially someone it's product compliance related. So you might have a warehouse in the EU that might offer this service, and essentially they would have the paperwork from you. Make sure you've got all the paperwork correct for your product. So different products have different levels of compliance. Obviously, you get very simple products which aren't going to go through much compliance, and then you get more complicated products where it kind of is obviously a digestible, something like that, which have to go through higher levels of compliance because of obvious reasons. And essentially, they'll keep the paperwork. They might keep sample products depending on what the product is. And then if trading standards ever wanted to visit the local trading standards in whichever country, then they would visit, they would check the products out, they would check the information and make sure you are compliant, basically.
Great. So we've got VAT registration, EPR, indirect representative for import export, a responsible person.
Yeah.
Anything else on the list?
Um, I mean, in terms of like compliance wise, that should really cover it. Obviously, more like individual products might require like licenses, those kind of things. For example, like an organic product, you need to get organic certificates. You need to get like an EU organic certificate, because anyone can say a product's organic, but they've got to actually prove that it is organic. And you have to prove in the EU that you're selling an organic product. So also other things like excise licenses for alcohol, as an example. So, I mean, general sense, those are the things that people need compliance wise. Certain products might fall into other categories and other things might be required depending on what it is. But as a general, that should cover most people.
Great, that's good to know. But equally, it's, I suppose, good to educate ourselves and to realize that it's a finite number of battles that we have to fight. But equally, getting an intelligent expert to look at it and make sure we don't miss something, like you jump through all the other hoops and then you can't sell your organic, hemp plants because you haven't got the license, would be a bit of a tragedy. So in the end, I guess we've got to employ experts. And by the way, that's pretty much everyone I know does this. I don't think anyone does this DIY, not more than once. Anyway, I've seen somebody try and do it DIY and it was just horrific. So don't do that, is my advice. If people want to check out what you guys do and work with you, what do you help with?
So yeah, I mean, in terms of what we can do, so we can cover all of the things I've mentioned, all those compliance aspects. So we can help you with all of that. If it's something that we can't help with, it's something to like particular, or it's not kind of within our remit of services, then we can put you in the right direction. But as general, what Avask offer is like accountancy services. So if you're looking to incorporate a business, whether that's UK, US, and some EU countries, customs, import and export in the UK and the EU, the countries I've mentioned, EPR, so making sure you're compliant with EPR, you've got the registrations you need to be able to sell online. As I mentioned, as at the moment, it's Germany and France where you're affected, but it's likely going to be more countries. There is some provisional timeframes for like Spain, Italy, the UK, etc. Exactly how that will work is not really that clear yet, but we will keep on top of the legislation. And if it's something that you need to register for, be sure we'll be able to register you. Responsible person as well. So yeah, anything kind of compliance based, we can help, and we'll help people expand, making sure they've got what they need to expand.
Great. That's very helpful. One-stop shop. And I have to say that having a one-stop shop, we talked about this before, that having millions of providers who've got to coordinate with each other is just a nightmare when you don't know and you don't understand it yourself. And so I would just say, yeah, a one-stop shop's important for this stuff. So a couple of final things. I mean, if you want to read about this stuff, I know you've got a blog article, or more than that, sort of like an Uber blog article about importing, exporting, customs, the whole business. Then if you go to amazingfba.com/export, you can read up all about that. And I think it's very important to keep yourself informed if you're even going to attempt to do this. amazingfba.com/export. And then finally, Jacob, I'm going to fill your calendar up. If anyone wants to book an appointment with you personally, amazingfba.com/Jacob. That's JACOB. amazingfba.com/Jacob. If you want to book in with the man himself who's just been guiding us through the rapids here. So really helpful, very detailed. I like the attention to detail because it's so critical in this area, isn't it? Any other things that I should have asked you, or that you feel that we should know about this?
I think there's one thing that we have forgot to mention, and it's about so this is not necessarily about kind of what you need, but some good news, and potentially for any kind of UK sellers who might be listening. There is a promotion being run by Amazon for transport from UK to EU and from EU to UK, Germany specifically. And it's something that we are working with Amazon on at the moment. It's Avask and Amazon transport service. Avask are doing the brokerage, and Amazon are doing the transport via Amazon transport service. It's a really good promotion. It saves a lot of money in a lot of places because it's subsidized. It's like an invite promotion, but if you're a UK based seller, you're selling in the EU, you're looking to sell in the EU, there's potential that you could be eligible for that promotion. So I know Michael's given my calendar. If you're interested, you want to learn more, do book in a call with me. We can have a 15-minute discussion, discuss whether it's going to work for your business. If not, what other avenues we can look at to get you selling and get you expanding.
Sounds very good. And is that invitation by Amazon, or can you guys invite somebody if it's appropriate?
So the invitation is by Amazon, but we can submit requests. So I can't guarantee that you will be eligible based on that request, but there's no harm in trying.
Yeah, that sounds like an extremely good option, right? Because first of all, Amazon is very good at logistics. It'll be cheaper, but then also it's coordination between the people you're trying to get to receive your goods and send them, probably, depending where
Yeah.
your goods are going from. So that, yeah, that implies fewer screw ups, which is always good, isn't it, when you're exporting? Okay, great. That's really very good news. Thank you so much for sharing that. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much. I think the only thing I would say is that it's worthwhile. I mean, I've seen my clients sort of rebuild some of their revenues in Germany, particularly, and I think it's really important if you sell in the UK to consider Germany, because you're just cutting yourself off from probably, potentially doubling your sales depending on the product and how it works, right? And I think that these are hoops to jump through. It's a pain, but two things that strike me, three things actually. Number one, you do it once and it's basically done. Number two, it's a barrier to your competition as well. And number three, you've got friendly people at Avask who can take care of most of it anyway. So just pay your money, get it done, and then go and make the money. So, Jacob, been good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Good to talk to finally an Avast person I've heard so many good things about from my members. So just remains for me to say to anyone listening, go and talk to Avask. Don't do DIY this. Don't suffer in silence. And to Jacob, many, many thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us on the live stream or on the replay. Don't forget to put your comments or questions, and we won't be able to weave them into the show now, but we certainly will come back to you if you've got any questions for Jacob. And don't ask me about import and export stuff, because this is stuff for experts. So, Jacob, thanks so much for coming live with us.